I think next up is University of North Florida, so if President Delaney and his staff will please come forward to the table. Oh, and bring your name tags with you, please.
Be careful what you ask for.
Are you ready?
I've been in this room before.
No.
I am cold. Yes,
Oh my God, that's where he is?
I just came in.
That's so funny, man. I tell you, those things don't go away. We are going to get started with our next university, which is University of North Florida. President Delaney, before you get started, if you would introduce your staff and your trustee board representation with you before you start with your presentation.
Yep, sure will. Thank you, Madam Chair. To my left is our provost, Mark Workman, who will be kind of walking through the work plan in a minute. To my immediate right is our board chair, Dr. Bruce Taylor. Bruce, by the way, is a Naval Academy grad. Also got his master's from Miami, Mr. Colson, and has his doctorate from the University of Florida, so he's well acquainted with higher ed. And then to his right is Dr. Kathy Robinson, who is chair of our faculty association, or president of our faculty association, which is the equivalent of a faculty senate for our institution.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I would like to commend the staff on putting together the outline for the work plan and the materials, and I can't imagine that it could have been any better in terms of the format and for us to fill out. And I know you stayed up like Mr. Chancellor, so I'll commend your staff for all of their work on putting it together. But it was a great format for us to work through. For the new members, as I know, as I was able to serve as the interim chancellor for a year, you're probably going to hear the word unique throughout the course of the next few days as each university describes their particular mission and the differences between their institution, others across the country and across the state. And I found that in explaining our mission, our particular mission, that it's been good for us to sort of outline what our board has designated as 4 guiding principles. And they're pretty simple and pretty basic. First is excellence, or attention to quality. Second is focus. Third is accountability. And fourth is relevance. Again, excellence or quality, kind of the premise is if we're going to do something, invest in something, budget for something, address something, add something, that we'll only do it if we can do it well. And if it's going to be second rate, then we simply won't do it and we'll steer our resources to another area. The second is focus, to focus on key programs, that our desire is not to be all things to all entities, to offer all majors. We don't view that as an appropriate role for a university of our size. The third is accountability, and I thought I'd take about a minute on that because that's been very, very important for us and for our board. Essentially, we measure about everything. We have spent a good amount of time gathering data from the other 10 universities in the system, but also in establishing 10 peer institutions that we have combed through data on those institutions across the country, primarily in the East Coast. It was a very cumbersome process for us to go through, and we learned a couple of things as we went through this data, but it allows us, all of those entities were things that were better than UNF in at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 areas. And then each year a team of us goes and spends a day at one of those places. This year we actually went to 2 of these institutions, and to sort of address Mr. Tripp's, one of Mr. Tripp's comments and concerns, which I appreciate and respect. The 2 that we went to this year was, one was called the College of New Jersey. It is about half of our size with about 3/4 of the budget. The other one we went to was a gorgeous campus, University of North Carolina in Charlotte, which is about 2 times UNF size with over 3 times the budget. So I think you get a little bit of sense as we've gone through these institutions that whether the university system is appropriately funded or not, it certainly is funded less than other institutions. And I think what that shows us is that we're an opportunity where the new dollar really allows us to really move a big lever, to move a big mountain as we go on. A second element that we learned in these peer assessments, where we're measuring library spending and student faculty ratios, class size ratios, the square foot of the plant, the ratios of the class sizes, etc. But some of the data we found, and you may find today, are just simply counted differently. We've had to go back 3 and 4 times on some simple things that would seem simple, like library spending per student, that kind of a ratio. The fourth thing is context is always important when in comparing. In the university system, new college, UF and FSU have 85, 90, 95% of their students going full-time. As a result, their graduation rates are simply going to be different than the rest of the system, where the rest of us range from about 50 to 70% of our students going full-time and a large percentage that are working at least part-time. In fact, 2/3 of our students work and about 1/3 of our students work full-time. So that has an impact on their ability to graduate. So context is important in terms of those measures. And then fourth is relevance. What the board has directed us to do is we want to be relevant to the cultural and the economic needs of the region and the state. So we measure everything we do against that aspect of relevance. That if we're going to add a program, if we're going to do any part of our budget, that it has to go through that sieve first. Occasionally we have what I call an academic opportunity, which would be akin to a business opportunity that kind of knocks on your door, that you say, hey, this is something we need to assess that may not have been in the core business plan to begin with, but you certainly have to address each of those. All faculty members personally will balance their teaching and their research agendas, balancing the amount of time they'll either spend in the classroom or preparing for class or in their research activity. Over half of the universities in the state are pursuing a research-intensive designation or a Research 1 designation if they aren't there already. The UNF does millions of dollars of research every year, and research activity for faculty is more than essential. It's required and mandated for faculty everywhere, but also at our university, to be active scholars and to have an active and vibrant research agenda. But our faculty really are focused, much like you'd find at a smaller private university, and unlike the Research 1 universities, is having a focus on the teaching mission. And all of this is an element of balance, how much time in a lab or the research activity versus the number of classes you teach and the energy that you put into those. And I've used the phrase teaching, but much like the phrase student housing, that's apparently now become obsolete. It's replaced the phrase dormitories or dorms. I still call them dorms, but learning now has replaced teaching, because you can do a lot of teaching with not much learning going on. But if the learning isn't going on, you're not doing any good. So that concept has really been broadened. And again, we've got to evaluate and score, are our students learning with the methodologies that our faculty are using to teach? Under that idea, that concept of excellence, the size of a research budget or the size of the university's enrollment doesn't necessarily equate to quality. UCF and FSU, who just spoke up here, UF are large and have large research budgets, but they're not good because they're big because they're good. And these are two different really concepts, and what UNF is focused on is that classroom experience, the individual attention to the students, the smaller size, again, the teaching mission. I grew up in Cincinnati, and the university of choice for our part of the state was the University of Miami of Ohio, where President Rosenberg, former chancellor, also attended, and he sent me a number of years ago the address of the new president for the University of Miami. Miami is one of our peer institutions. And at the time that I was a student, Miami of Ohio was the destination of choice college. Ohio State was a research university, but was far closer to open enrollment than today. What's developed in that state, University of Miami is a wonderful institution. It's a regional, and by regional I mean throughout the Midwest, destination university for students in Illinois and Michigan and Ohio and Kentucky, Indiana, etc. In fact, over 1/3 of their students actually come from out of state, and that's despite a particularly high out-of-state tuition. But it's a quality institution. It's about UNF size, has about the same amount of research activity in terms of budget. And so Ohio there has two great universities, with Ohio State and Miami of Ohio two very different missions, but both would get an A+ if you were to grade them against their mission and against their charge. So as I said earlier, and then I'm going to turn it over to the provost, our calling card really is a focus on the student, a focus on the small class sizes, the class size ratios, the ratios of faculty to students. As my son, who was an English major, came home to me a number of years ago from school, and he said, Dad, he says, you can't teach English in a class of 100. And I think that's really true. That's the kind of a course that needs interplay and interaction. And we believe that for a particular brand of students, that a UNF setting is a great place for a student to get an education. I tell all students and parents there's a place for every student that fits your budget and your appetite and that fits your desire. But the niche that we're after is essentially the one I've just tried to describe for you. And now I'm going to turn it over to the provost to kind of walk through the elements of the work plan, and then the chair and the faculty rep and I'll kind of add some color commentary as we go. And obviously we invite questions at any step of the way. Okay, Mark?
Thank you. Let me begin by identifying the content of the slide there. It's one of our faculty members and works in our advanced weather lab, checking on some instrumentation. And I'm not quite sure what to point this at, but thank you. Some facts and figures about UNF. We have a current enrollment of 16,000, close to 17,000 students. As President Delaney indicated, it's important to note that over 30% of our student body is part-time and less than 1/5 is residential. So we have a set of challenges that a more residential full-time student body does not present. Our rate of selectivity is on the rise. This past year, to respond to a question that Governor Solano raised, we admitted approximately 52% of the applicants to the university. We also admitted close to 1,500 transfer students. We've had a long-standing and very positive relationship with our community college partners. We're about to formalize an arrangement with St. John's River Community College to guarantee admission to academically qualified AA students, and they will have seamless advising between St. John's River and UNF. We also have a very positive relationship with Florida State Community College at Jacksonville, and as it has emerged into a 4-year baccalaureate institution, its emphasis on access is enabling UNF to become more selective without turning its back on the regional student demand.
Kind of just jump in on the endowment here. I know some of this will be tough for you to place in some sort of a context. When I went to UNF in 2003, we stated a goal to have our endowment hit $100 million by 2009 or 10. We hit it in 2008, but it lasted about 5 minutes. But we did make it, and that actually, at that moment in time, that was the quickest that a public university in Florida had hit a $100 million endowment that didn't have a medical school. But we're starting to claw it back up.
One of the exciting aspects of working with President Delaney is I never know what he's going to say and when he's going to turn the floor back over.
Don't you hate a guy like that?
I too was going to make a comment about the endowment, which is that, and really it complements the observation that President Delaney made, and that is that it's really, I think, indicative of the terrific relationship that the university has with the community at large. UNF takes very seriously its obligation as a steward of place. We regard ourselves as a regional institution, albeit one which strives to fulfill its mission at a level of national quality. And again, the size and rapidity with which our endowment grew is indicative of, again, the strong relationship between university and community. Indeed, were you to take UNF out of Jacksonville, Jacksonville would not be the city it is, nor would UNF be the university it is. Over 70% of our graduates tend to reside in the region. So we are a provider of intellectual capital to Northeast Florida. We have flagship programs that have
Jump
been...
in there again as
Yep.
well. About half of our, it's a comedy team, about half of our students come from outside of the Northeast Florida area. And so a very large percentage of those that come from outside Northeast Florida actually remain in Northeast Florida after graduating. Back to you.
Okay. The President and I actually annually visit every department on campus, so we're used to this kind of routine here. A comment also before we leave the first slide about research, again, to complement what President Delaney said. We are not a research university, but I would like to emphasize that we are indeed a university that values and supports research. We do so for a number of reasons. First, and primarily because it contributes to student learning. Secondly, because it contributes to regional needs. Thirdly, because we too are contributing to pure and applied knowledge. And fourthly, now we are eager to make a contribution to the New Florida Initiative. Looking to the future, we are committed to carrying out our mission, as I said, in becoming, or our vision, that is to say, of becoming a regional university of national quality. Jacksonville significantly is projected to grow in size to become the 37th largest city in the country. And given our regional mission, that entails significant responsibilities to the university. I would just like to call your attention to to a component of the work plan that I've reproduced here. It really will characterize our effort as we move into the future. We will, as it says, continue to offer a singular undergraduate experience. We'll strengthen our commitment to provide relevant and needed graduate programs, and we will purposefully intensify research activity, again, for all the reasons that I indicated. We have a master planning process underway concurrent with the BOG strategic planning process. The capacity of the university has been identified as being 25 to 30,000 students. So given the SUS need to produce approximately 50,000 additional degrees every year, UNF is prepared to make a significant contribution to that effort. At the same time, while we will indeed grow to an institution considerably larger than the one we are now, we plan to do so in a way that will enable us to sustain the strong sense of community that characterizes UNF at the present moment. Over the next 10 years, UNF is likely to add a number of doctoral degree programs. We currently offer 3, but again, given our commitment to serve the region, I think it will be incumbent upon us to offer more to meet certain precise educational needs. And with regard to our 5 to 10 year goals, I think you'll see that they're fully consonant with those of the Board of Governors. And we've provided you with a list of our aspirational institutions, and on the previous page there was a list of the peer institutions. And again, as President Delaney indicated, we will continue our process of visiting more of those institutions on an annual basis. This is a map of the current campus. There's, as you see, an enormous amount of green space. Approximately 1/3 of it is wetlands. Approximately 1/3 of the campus is buildable, and approximately 1/3 is already constructed. The master plan calls for considerable densification of the campus and also extension of its buildings out to the perimeter of the campus. If you've been to UNF, I think you'll agree that it's one of the prettiest campuses within the SUS, and given the master planning process that we are employing, we're confident that it will become ever more coherent and functional as well. Again, as I indicated, UNF's goals are fully consonant with those of the system. We are committed to educating more Florida citizens. We are committed to providing rich programs in areas that will contribute specifically to workforce development, and we are committed to contributing to the knowledge economy, both by way of providing educational opportunities for our students, research opportunities for our faculty, and intellectual, cultural, and economic capital for our region and our state. With regard to a few of these rates in particular, we've seen a spike recently in freshman retention rates. We're intent upon doing everything we can to advance them further. Our graduation rates, as I indicated earlier, are a challenge given the composition of our student body, but there too we have plans in place to improve upon those rates as well.
Again, we'll sort of pause. The freshman retention rate up there shows 78.6. It jumped to, I think, 83 or 84 for the 09-10 cohort. And what we see is that enhanced advising can have a big impact on the student bodies that we have. All of these we've benchmarked against the peers. We've set up a multi-year goal to see it move. And once again, when we go through our budgetary process, each time we increase or move a dollar around, we're showing which of the elements of our strategic plan we're trying to advance and how we're trying to shift those numbers over.
Neither President Delaney nor I do regression analyses, but fortunately we have staff members who do. So our rates are carefully calculated based upon our past performance and the potential impact of the interventions that we'll be making. Let me move on and discuss ways in which we are proposing to move the needle on the rates that you've just seen. I've identified a few of our immediate goals. The first is to enrich the learning environment and provide support to assure student success. There is ample evidence to confirm a cause and effect relationship, as the President just indicated, between the extent to which a student feels bonded to his or her institution and the likelihood of his or her persistence and eventual graduation. Such bonding is best achieved through interpersonal contact. This is especially critical at UNF because so many of our students attend part-time and do not reside on campus. Thus, we have a particular commitment to increasing the number of advisors who guide students through their programs of study, to increasing the number of faculty to permit as much personalized learning as possible, and to increasing and enriching social life so students feel a connection to a community. We've recently constructed a new student union. We're in the process of designing a wellness center. We have some beautiful residence halls and some not so beautiful. We have plans to develop a new dining facility. Our athletic program recently went D1, so there really is an ever-increasingly vital sense of community at UNF.
Yeah, I think we have a typo that we didn't, on the student advisor ratio upper division, the third line down, the target number. I think we flipped some numbers. But I think this...
The target is 418.
Okay.
Yep.
And what this sort of captures thematically how we're dealing, how you'll see later on with the budget that although the student-faculty ratio is often an interesting number, I think really the class size ratio is more telling. You can have an awful lot of faculty. If they're not teaching classes, it may be irrelevant to a student if they can't find a class or if they're in a class with 2,000, 3,000, or 4,000 students. The advising is things when we had more funding, until the recession hit 3 years ago, we were really able to see, as Mark has referenced, needles move. The smaller classes under 20, the same thing. The success rate, the pass rates on licensure exams, etc. So a lot of what we're trying to focus on our budget is adding sections, adding advisors, adding sections by adding faculty members.
Right. There's also another hallmark of UNF is what we refer to as transformational learning opportunities. We put a lot of funding into enabling students to have personalized educational opportunities. That might take the form of study abroad, research in the community, research in a laboratory. It entails a lot of one-on-one contact, and again, it results in exactly the kinds of retention and graduation that we're all seeking. To that same end, we also are seeking to increase the number of distance learning courses that we offer. Students are very interested in distance learning, I think for two primary reasons. One is because students are very comfortable using technology with which to think and research and study and communicate. And secondly, distance learning courses are often convenient. Students can take them at times that fit in their schedules, and it enables them to add additional courses that they might not be able to take otherwise, and thus to hasten their time to degree. What we have found, however, is that responsible and effective distance learning is, if anything, more rather than less cost-intensive and labor-intensive. So for us, anyhow, at UNF, we're approaching distance learning with academic integrity, but not with the intention to reduce the cost of delivery.
So a couple of y'all raise your eyebrows there that when I was going through college, what distance learning was a videotape lecture with a fixed camera and a professor standing at a podium.
In black and white.
Yeah. Yeah, it was in color. Yeah, and what we've seen is that, number one, the student expectations. Number one, that's often low quality. Some classes are fine to just have a lecture or a survey. But again, if you want the interchange, you want to develop the critical thinking, it requires connectedness, it requires interplay, interchange, etc. So what we've done is, for the most part, I think with just a couple exceptions, our sections are 35 or under. And the students are critiquing each other's papers. The faculty will take you down a different portal. They'll have a snippet of a film. They'll have excerpts of books. But it's almost like putting on a movie, only it's for an entire semester. So it takes more time for the faculty member to do it right. And secondly, we don't view them as money makers to do them right, because if you could do it for 3,500 and it's just a multiple choice test, that's fine. But to have it where it's essays, have it where it's writing, where the writing is being critiqued and analyzed and helped, it requires an awful lot of resources. So that's a way for us to try to offer more sections, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to save us money. Of course, so many of the proprietary institutions have figured out a way to really mass market and make money on them, but I think there's some serious quality questions on that.
Our second short-term goal, and this will of course be a long-term goal as well, is to increase access and diversity. Indeed, UNF always has been and always will be committed to access. It is the UNF is the moving force behind a program that we have called the Jacksonville Commitment, which is a partnership between UNF, a private college, Jacksonville University, a historically black college, Edward Waters, and FSCJ. The Jacksonville Commitment guarantees full support for students who are academically qualified, but whose resources place them below the federal poverty line. The program has already had an extraordinary rate of success. In the first cohort, over 90% of the students have been successful and will be enrolling in their sophomore year at UNF. That in itself is testimony to the kind of infrastructure of support that we provide to those students and which we wish to generalize for our student body as a whole. It attests to the effectiveness of quality advising and instruction. We also provide a number of merit scholarships, and we're seeking to increase the number that we provide, because merit scholarships also enable us to expand the diversity of the student body. For instance, we have a nationally recognized music program, and it recruits students from across the state, across the region, and indeed nationally to perform and fill critical roles in our classical and jazz ensembles. And we would not be able to attract those students without merit support to do so.
A couple more comments on that. This Jacksonville Commitment is something we're quite proud of as a community. Again, essentially we're saying to every poor kid in Duval County, If you graduate from high school, you'll get a free 4-year ride to one of the 4 local institutions. And again, and that includes room, board, books, and a meal plan at UNF. The community college doesn't have a meal plan or housing, but each of us have played a little different role. City Hall, the mayor, has put money into a central scholarship pot. And one of the goals is to try to tell kids in high school college is possible, regardless of where your money is. And the retention rate that Mark just mentioned is unbelievable, because that's high. There's a very, very high-risk audience, coming from impoverished backgrounds that are staying in from their freshman to the sophomore year in the initial group that has remained from their first semester of the sophomore year into the second. And their grades they've been hanging on, and so the retention rate has been terrific. We think it's a great model, but it shows what appropriate advising, tutoring, and counseling can do to the highest risk college student. It can work. It just takes some energy and resources.
President Delaney, I'm going to ask if you would hurry on with your portion so you can leave time for questions from the board, please.
Okay.
I won't linger in that case. Again, we don't seek to become a research university, but we do indeed value and support it for, again, all the reasons I've already identified. We have faculty who are engaged in multi-million-dollar federally supported research activities, for instance, in the area of ruggedized and miniaturized fuel cell technology and advanced sensor technology. We also have a special window of opportunity as a result of the creation of the Taylor Engineering Research Institute, which bears the name of our board chair. Through a combination of E&G dollars, private support, and New Florida funding, we have an opportunity to recruit a world-class scientist to lead the institute, which is particularly timely in light of the disaster that's occurring in the Gulf. And as the institute will benefit as well from synergy with our nationally recognized coastal biology program and our existing environmental center. So again, we play a small but steadily increasing role in the production of new knowledge and applied knowledge in the state. Our enrollment projections can be amplified, they can be ramped up, they can be constricted. They really are dependent upon the availability of resources. As I've already indicated, it's been determined that we have a capacity to accommodate 25 to 30,000 students. How quickly we do so is, again, purely a function of the resources with which we have to educate them. There is demand for admission to UNF at every level: FTIC, transfer, graduate. We have a number of new degree programs already in the pipeline, and these reflect the broad range of interests that one typically finds at a comprehensive university. You can see programs in nutrition, art history, religious studies, and so on. We also have a number of prospective degree programs that reflect emergent student interest, areas of university strength, and our awareness of system-wide priorities to develop Florida's workforce and to support research and development in critical areas. The healthcare industry in Jacksonville is actually the largest employer in the city. There are a number of very large healthcare systems, and we have an extraordinarily heterogeneous population. So advanced degrees in public health are certainly appropriate for UNF. I've already spoken about the opportunity we have in coastal engineering. Jacksonville, as you're probably aware, is a hub city. It's a center of not only national but indeed global trade, and we have an extraordinarily strong transportation and logistics program that contributes to the advancement of that industry in the city. And we also have an exceptionally strong program in sign language interpreting and a wonderful collaboration with St. Augustine School for the Deaf and Blind. So again, we've got a number of programs in the works that speak to state need and regional need as well. And with that, I will turn the floor back over to you.
Sure. The last three, and I'll go through quickly, Madam Chair. One of the directives, of course, was, you know, what would we do with the new funding? What are our plans to address the issues that we've walked through? And that's regardless of what the available resources are, because we have multiple years to stack up. So this particular slide points out many of the items we've addressed here today. The need to hire more faculty. Even with the faculty that we have budgeted now to hire for next year, we still will have fewer faculty than we had 3 years ago. We actually responded 2 years ago by rolling our enrollment back because we had retiring or departing faculty members, and rather than greatly expand the classes, change those ratios, we rolled enrollment down to kind of keep that calling card item that I talked about earlier. Again, a focus on advising student life, distance learning. The next slide, what I know you'll be considering on Friday is whether to approve or not the request for tuition differential. The bottom two boxes show where we would direct that funding should you concur with our request. On the left is the 70% that would go to education. On the right is what we do with the need-based aid. Much like the previous president, UNF has been, we have always sort of tithed any increase in budget and put it into need-based aid in the last 7 years, and so we've continued to invest in that. The lower left talks about the faculty lines and the lab manager. The additional sections will be able to teach. That's our major problem. The students simply can't get a class to graduate because we may be only offering certain of those maybe once a year. On the right is, again, the need-based funding, the Jacksonville Commitment Program, which I mentioned earlier, our SWOOP scholarship, which is a need-based aid, and additional students that would be touched by pumping up that funding. The next slide, we had originally proposed, pursuant to the new statutes that passed as a result of the settlement, an academic enhancement fee. This package was submitted before the committee that took a look at this and felt that it didn't have enough time to put an appropriate regulation in place. But again, the bottom two boxes are what we would be addressing the funding and showing the metrics that we would use to measure those, the advising system, the distance learning, the additional course sections, et cetera, as well as placing money in the transformational learning opportunities, which are the TLOs that the provost mentioned, which involve study abroad and artistic performance, a museum showing, undergraduate research activities, et cetera, and also pure money to pump into the need-based program to be able to maximize the available funding. And with that, Madam Chair, we've concluded the prepared portion.
Thank you, President Delaney. Any questions from members of the board?
Madam Chair, while we're waiting for that, could I just make one quick observation? And outstanding presentation, but I already knew that because, again, UNF agreed to be one of the two guinea pigs with Florida State and UNF taking the lead on that. But I wanted to tease out something here that is important to the board, I think. We talked earlier about what kinds of things could bubble out of these conversations that we need to take up long term. And that issue of enrollment came up. And President Delaney astutely pointed out two things. One, the institution's ability to grow in terms of their enrollment, but also the system's need to grow enrollment. And that's a very important point because that ties the two together. He made the great point that while they want to grow to a certain number of students, they also recognize that there is a system need to grow new baccalaureate students at the same time. And moving forward, take the opportunity for the system to interface with the universities to see if we can get to where both want to go, to see a university grow to an appropriate enrollment size, but also know that we've got to create slots for more baccalaureate degrees. And that also then interfaces with our ultimate request to the legislature to help fund on an annual basis not only our existing numbers but those new degrees, to make sure that we're targeting enrollment that works, not just providing additional access, but additional access to universities where that access can be better targeted. So you can see there's a good observation in terms of how our system grows on just one issue of enrollment and how we can take that up in terms of building our legislative budget request, our enrollment growth requests, and do it in a way that is more targeted going forward with our universities as partners in that regard.
Governor Colson?
Mr. President, thank you for your presentation. Your Pell Grant, the number of your Pell Grant students is a little bit higher than Florida State. You're at close to 30%. What percentage of your student body is receiving Bright Futures?
Oh, God, I just saw that number. It's 70 to start, and then it drops down because they don't all keep it. And it's probably about 50 that overall, but 70 that walk in, I think, is what the percentage is.
I guess as we deal with the tuition increase issues, and I've been a little bit different than Governor Tripp in terms of being in favor of tuition increases, but I think I agree with Governor Tripp. We've got to maintain our universities affordable for all families. I guess I'd like to understand from you all at some point how you all define need. You have a significant number of students who are probably not Pell Grant eligible, but who are going to be paying a significant amount of increased tuition over the next few years who are not receiving Bright Futures. So that does interest me. The other thing that interests me is on your academic enhancement fee. You and I have discussed this. It seems to me that's just a fee that does exactly what tuition does. And the legislature has told us they don't want us to increase tuition more than 15% a year, and I don't think they want to do it with a fee. But how we define fees and what are appropriate fees, I think is an important issue for this board. I'm glad it looks like we're going to defer it. Because when you do a fee, you don't put 30% aside for need-based tuition. And so I think that discussion and what are appropriate fees for this board are things that we need your help for in the future.
Well, it's a great question. You and I did have a conversation on that. You know, under a strict reading of that, then you couldn't have a fee for anything. You know, but what we all of the universities, as you're aware, we face those cuts, so we still need the additional course sections. We still need the advisors. The advising numbers, I think we were showing in the 470 students to one advisor. Really, we need to get that to about 300 to 1. A great model has been Florida State does a terrific job with that, and that's one we're trying to emulate and distill. But that requires more money than what we've been able to get in the past. I think it's clear the legislature said we're going to allow the Board of Governors to authorize fees that are unique to the particular university needs. We felt that the fee that we were proposing, and probably will next year, you know, again depending on how what the board's attitude is towards fees, address some pretty fundamental needs that would speed graduation, add course section, allow us to put more graduates, more baccalaureate production out into the community. As to your first question, because I have this conversation with students, with some frequency. The student body leadership across the state, by and large, has supported, as you know, the tuition increases because they realize that, you get what you pay for. And I think we've moved now to 48th in tuition in the country. We're still at the bottom. And so when I'll talk to students or parents, I'll say, I don't know if I'd focus on the increase. What should it be? What percentage of the cost of your education should you pay? Tim Jones had a slide that he produced some time ago that at the time, I think the state had 70% of the cost of education was state support. Another 10 was Bright Futures. Another 10 was need-based aid. And what it pointed to, and Tim, correct me if I've got this wrong, is the average student was paying about 10% of the cost of education. That seems like a pretty good deal. Who gets hurt are those that are too rich to be poor, the ones that are right above the ability to get either need-based aid or a subsidized loan, a Stafford loan, those sorts of things. It's the lower middle class or the middle class that ends up paying that price. But part of what I'd have to come back to say is that you're making an investment. It's just like a company investing in a widget-making machine and borrowing money, investing capital to leverage a return to create a lot of widgets. What a college student is doing is guaranteeing that they're virtually guaranteeing they're going to make $30,000 more a year the rest of their lives. And that's worth something.
May I add a comment to that? I think President Delaney is absolutely correct. What we've done is identified the infrastructure that we think responsibly we should put in place to assure student success, and then back out of that with the cost. And that's how we came up with a fee.
And we did on the fee proposal set aside 10%, the lower right, for need-based aid. Like I said, we've always tithed with new money. We take 10% of any new revenue that we get in and pop that into need-based aid. That's been what we've done for 7 years.
Governor Tripp?
Yeah, I didn't want to get into this, but it keeps coming back. Same thing. You know, we've heard over the years that education has inflated the cost tremendously, much like medical care, far more than anything else in our country, okay? And somehow it became bad for Florida to keep our education affordable. There aren't that many people making $300,000 and $400,000 a year in Florida. There are a lot of people in which it is tough. And when you say, well, just make an investment, you know, another $30,000, $40,000, you'll make that much back. But we forget to also talk about all of the things that have been presented to us as a board about the enormous amount of borrowing that our students have had to do and the debt that they're coming out of the universities with. So each time we talk about this, we talk about it in a vacuum, and I just have to keep reminding everybody that I don't think it was bad that tuition was affordable. You know, California, yes, they went way out, and we were saying, oh, everybody's going to California. Now they're bankrupt. And you know, so all of these come to play. The one important thing that I wanted to mention about your growth, I think we need to be very careful with our growth plans until we factor in how the state colleges are going to deal, especially with schools like yourself, FAU, FIU, etc., that have a large number of bachelorate students in there, because that may change the landscape dramatically. And I think we've got this program, but I'd be a little concerned about us getting too far ahead until we understand what's going to happen, because realistically, there's going to be a lot of funding that it's going to take. The legislature is going to focus on it. They always have been very supportive of the community college, which now become a state college. And so I think we're going to have those competing factors, and it may be that the university system is going to be quite different in 5 or 7 years, and that a number of people that maybe were coming to you may go into a different situation, which makes your partnership very, very important. I mean, I could see a time when, and I don't know why it wouldn't happen, when a university and a state college could share campuses like community colleges and universities do today, and truly have partnerships where students could go back and forth, and we could account for the expense to each university, et cetera, and determine where their degree is going to come from. Some of the best and brightest stay in the universities. Others decide it's better for their interest to stay in the state college and function in that case. So I thought it was interesting, because I think you're an example of a university that will be impacted by what happens.
Yeah, we haven't seen it at all. And part of that is we've got a great relationship with the state college in town, and when we communicate on which degrees they want to offer, and with 1 or 2 exceptions, we've said, look, we're under-enrolled in this area, please don't add it. They don't do it. Hey, this is a degree they want to add, fire science management, go ahead. Interior decorating, go ahead. Those are not areas that we're interested in. Secondly, I think that we compete for a different kind of student. The students that are looking to get a college degree for less money, there's a percentage that are going after the reputation of a university. So I think it's many years down the road. We haven't seen it at all at our particular institution. Going back to the costs again, you know, a lot of parents, when you've got both parents that are working, have to put their 3- and 4-year-olds in daycare. And they're spending more than it costs to send a 19-year-old kid to a public university in the state of Florida. It's cheaper to put a 4-year-old in daycare than to get a college education. There's no question that we need to watch costs. You know, at our university, we've watched them. We are one of the 2 or 3 that didn't have to lay off any faculty members because we've managed the budgets very tightly. But when you have hundreds of fewer course offerings because you don't have the money, and students are having to wait a year to graduate to take the last one or two classes they need, and you only have the money to offer them once a year, when your advising ratio has gone from 300 to 470 to 1, clearly we're having an impact on quality. And when the students themselves are saying, you know what, if that's what you're going to give us for the tuition differential, we'll support that, I think that's a pretty good, that's the marketplace talking back to those of us that are in retail.
Governor Edwards?
Trying to get back for a minute to the workplace or the work plans for our university and cost. And I'm coming back to differential tuition because that's part of what every one of the work plans is related to. John, I think you're kind of uniquely situated to answer this in that you've been an elected public official, a university president, which you still are, and also been involved with the system as their chancellor for a while. Every one of our universities, if I'm correct, has asked for the maximum increase to 15%, the maximum extra 8. Initially, I didn't understand that differential tuition would mean that each of our 11 universities would all be kind of automatically entitled to it. And as a philosophical point, and I understand you're going to be arguing for UNF when your time comes, but trying to separate you from president for a minute. Is this what you really thought differential tuition was going to lead us into, that each university would automatically get it every year?
Number one, I don't think every university is going to ask for it every year. I think at some point some are going to not have the pricing power. That the alternative may well be people going to a state college or going to some other institution. So it's just, Governor, that we are so far behind in terms of revenue with the state support cut as much as it has been. To be able to keep your nose above the waterline, you're probably looking at a few years of those requests to be able to make that work. Clearly the legislature expected it this year because the budget they released assumed that the Board of Governors is going to approve the differential for all of the universities. My gut is, like the lay citizen, is that, you know, this year probably they've got to, just because we're still so strapped, and you probably need to have the universities have a little revenue going into next year. With the federal stimulus money disappearing, with the potential of the oil spill having a devastating impact on Florida's economy, I think we're going to need the revenue to be able to get those things produced.
Governor Frost?
So I don't see it every year. I see a few dropping off in the years in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you for your presentation. Money seems to be an issue that we've spoken about for all the universities. How did you determine exactly what new degree programs you now want to offer when money seems to be such an issue, and you say that some students have to wait a whole year to get that one course? For example, you're doing a master's degree in nutrition, you're asking for, in nutrition and dietetics, and then later a bachelor's degree in the same. Mm-hmm. What made you decide on that, or art history, or religious studies, when you have other programs that are in the pipeline that possibly can be producing good grants, even though you say your focus is not primarily research, but it really is a little bit. Your professors are out there doing it. So how did you determine, or who determined, that these would be presented to us today?
The degrees are not presented to you for approval.
No, I know.
Only the doctorates would come up here. We have, all of the universities have an internal process over what's next up.
Right.
By and large, they're programs where we're not going to need to add faculty, or particularly numbers of faculty. We've already got them in place. They are areas where we already have a particular strength, or they are areas where there's an immense public demand. As the provost mentioned, you know, we're a major healthcare center. Mayo Clinic, Shands from the University of Florida, the Baptist Health System is a very, very large hospital system. And so in the healthcare areas, they're literally knocking on our doors. We've got to have these. So it goes back to our relevance component. They're either a response to the economic or cultural needs of the community, or they're in response to a particular, what I call, academic opportunity, where we've got faculty with a particular strength that for one reason or another we've happened to have been able to recruit, and this is the next step. We don't go forward if we don't have the money, and we do reduce programs as well. We terminate some programs as well and then shift those resources.
I appreciate that, but I do think as a state system, we need to look at some of those things, because I do realize that your Board of Trustees can make these decisions, and that we are the ones that either say yay or nay to the PhD programs. But I am seeing programs here that maybe in your immediate vicinity are not available to students, but possibly should be looked at anyway, even though it's not our role right now. But if we are thinking the state system, I'm not so sure that there aren't other schools in the immediate area that have music or religious studies or art history, etc. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I understand that we don't add them unless we have to. And those music, for example, is a particularly strong program at UNF, and it's one of the top programs in the country. Hence, we're going to see some growth in that particular area. But I appreciate the point.
Governor Duncan.
And you can table mine for a later discussion, but I do at least want to at some point circle back on the distance learning concept. And I do get the fact of the intensity. I think one of the other things I've heard is the expectation of students of almost instantaneous response from faculty and how they evaluate them, and that there's some serious issues related to that. But again, kind of like the research question, I struggle with what can we be doing better as a system to lower that burden on the smaller institutions, or how to better leverage it, and what as a state we can be doing to have a more cohesive online educational delivery system.
Yeah, you're going to hear different points of view on distance learning, I think, over the next few days on some other universities that have a different pursuit. Some of what our intention today was to show this is our perspective. This is part of our mission. It's a part of our of the plasma. That's the way we operate and the way we look at these things.
Are there any other questions that folks would like to at least register so that we can have the university address them later? Dr. Solano?
I didn't have a question. I was just going to follow up. I think we need another name, like online education or e-education is maybe more accurate, because some of these distance learning courses enroll students who are sitting in the residence halls. But what it does do is it makes it more able for them to fit courses into their schedule, because they don't have to go to a classroom at a certain time. They can just get online and work whenever it's convenient. But it may not be necessarily distant, although that is obviously a part of it, but it's emerged into a much larger kind of approach to educating.
And some are hybrids, where there's class and
Yes.
the online component.
Any other questions that the board would like to log or have the university respond to later? I want to thank you very much, President Delaney, and certainly thank Chairman Taylor for coming to brief with us. We're going to take just a 10-minute break, and at the end of that break, we'd ask if Fanny would already be up at the table so we can start right, I guess, in 10 minutes from now.
She asked for them to turn it up, and I said, be careful what you ask for, because if they turn it up, we are going to be boiling.
I'm never called.
It's a way.